Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And right now we can find Mercury in the sky, in the evening sky, at what is called maximum elongation. And what that means is that Mercury is as far from the sun as it gets for this cycle, in terms of the number of degrees between them. And so that usually means that Mercury is as high and as visible in the sky as it can be. And in fact, that is the case. Mercury's been visible for some time now, for a while, along with Venus. And now, as Venus has gone invisible, it's Mercury holding that space on his own. And this phenomenon of maximum elongation is something that you won't find a lot of astrologers talking about. But it's something that is a crucial turning point in terms of the visible phenomenon. As Mercury comes into the sky and it's increasing in elongation, it tends to go up. And then the elongation reaches a kind of hovering point, and then the elongation begins to decrease and Mercury begins to leave the sky. So it's really important to understand the maximum elongations if you want to see Mercury, because Mercury is a tough planet to see. So I began tracking these back in the day as I was documenting the sky for people as a photographer. And I would have them on my calendar, you know, Mercury's at maximum elongation, time to get the trickster on film, you know, and then one time after doing so, I came back and front and center on my desk, I had a copy of the Emerald Tablet, this same copy that I'm going to show you here. And for those of you who are listening on the audio version, and you want to see the visuals, I remind you that the podcast is now available on YouTube. Just just YouTube my name, Gary P. Caton, and you'll find the podcast in the video form. So now this is very interesting because one of the big misconceptions about the Emerald Tablet is that it's the source of the saying, as above, so below. Well, that's true in one sense. The saying, as above, so below, captures sort of the essence of the spirit of one of the parts of this document, the Emerald Tablet. But in truth, what it says is that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, in order to accomplish the miracles of the one. So what we have really here, instead of as above, so below, instead of the stars, you know, beaming down some rays of fate on people that are inescapable, right? There's actually a correspondence, like literally a series of letters, a series of messages between the above and the below, so that the stars are telling us something about the heavenly recipe that's available, and we are also in correspondence back with that, saying, this is what I've got. You know, can we get the recipe done with these ingredients, because I'm missing one of them, you know, that sort of thing. And I think this is really important to understand. In and of itself, it's not simply as above, so below. There's a two-way correspondence. Anywho, for some reason, I had just come back from one of these sky viewing sessions, and from witnessing Mercury in the above at maximum elongation. And I'm looking at this thing on my desk and saying that which is below corresponds to that which is above. And I'm thinking to myself, is it possible that this thing that I see as a document telling me about a spiritual principle of correspondence, general correspondence between the heavens and the earth. Is it possible that it could be more literal than that, or also literal? Is it possible that it's not just a spiritual process? It also refers to a spiritual process of alchemy, of purification through alchemy, right? Is it possible that it's like literally astronomical? That the above points, the maximum elongations, correspond with something that's below? And I thought, well, that's probably like too good to be true, but you're not going to be satisfied unless you check it out, right? So I got out my ephemeris and I started looking and said, okay, so here's maximum elongation, and then here's the conjunction. And the conjunction, when Mercury is conjunct the sun, it's invisible. So it's below the threshold of visibility, whereas the maximum elongation is as far above the threshold of visibility as it gets, right? Wow, they're happening in the same degrees. And then look, and what about the next elongation, right? Because Mercury goes from evening star through the conjunction invisible retrograde and then pops up as morning star. What about that morning elongation? That one happened in the same degrees too. Wow. Like, yeah, but that probably is just a coincidence, right? Like, it doesn't happen every time like that. Go through, well, oh, here's another elongation, here's another conjunction, here's another elongation, all three of them in the same degrees. And then go through enough to see it happens that way every single time. Holy smokes. I was completely blown away. I had no idea, even though I had been doing this some time and tracking this some time, that this document was literally encoding the astronomy of Mercury. I want to show you a visual to make it a little more clear what I'm talking about. This is in my book. This is from my book, Hermetica Triptycha, Volume 1, The Mercury Elemental Year. So what I'm saying here is that point 1 in this diagram, Mercury's maximum elongation as evening star, which is where we are now in the cycle. Mercury is in the evening sky and it's high as bright as it gets. That event happens with Mercury in the same degrees that it will eventually regress to at the conjunction with the sun, what's called the inferior conjunction with the sun, because it's happening between the sun and the earth. Then Mercury will reappear in the morning and achieve maximum elongation, highest and brightest as morning star. That event, once again, happens in the same degrees as the previous two. So literally, that which is above, evening sky elongation, corresponds to that which is below, inferior conjunction. And that which is below, inferior conjunction, corresponds to that which is above, morning elongation. All three events are absolutely related. They happen in the same zodiacal degrees. This is astounding. This is something that I can't believe has gone unnoticed by astrologers. As far as I can tell, I'm the first one to ever notice this. And so I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I called up my alchemy tutor, my good friend, and was telling him all about it. I'm like, oh my God, it's like literally the above and the below and the above and and I was like, and then I was like, oh, holy crap. At the same time, I realized the next rubric or verse, I guess you want, of the Emerald Tablet talks about its father is the sun, its mother the moon, the wind carries it in its belly, and its nurse is the earth, right? Well, this is like the elements, right? Sun, fire, moon, water, wind, air, earth is earth, right? Well, that happens to be the order in which Mercury does these triple alignments. It does it in fire signs, then water signs, then air signs, and then earth signs. And that happens to be also the reverse of zodiacal order. So go figure, the Mercury retrogrades line up in reverse zodiacal order. But pretty cool. There's two correspondences from the Emerald tablet that literally spell out the astronomy of Mercury. It's amazing. And so I decided, okay, I've got to get this on paper where I can follow it more easily, because as I said, it's not easy. If you look up in an ephemeris and you try to deduce Mercury's elongations, you have to compare each line. Okay, this one to this one, and well, it's getting bigger. Oh, it's getting bigger. Oh, it's getting bigger. Oh, it's kind of, and then you're interpolating. Then you go, well, I think it's right about here. Well, yeah, now it's getting smaller, and it's an incredibly laborious project. So you have to get a programs that's specifically geared towards these elongations. So that's what I did, and it's interesting because one of the reviews on Amazon, somebody on there who thinks they know enough to do a review about my book, says something about, they were dissing about the ephemerides that I made in the back here, and how, oh, it's no big deal. Well, I challenge you to find any other book that has ephemerides that include maximum elongation. Won't find it. This is the only one. And so I created a series of ephemerides that had both maximum elongations and the conjunctions and the degrees in which they were happening. And I'll show you a little sample from that for this particular time around. So this particular time around, the maximum elongation was on June 4th or 5th, and it was in around 9 degrees of Cancer. And then the conjunction is happening. Not sure what's going on there with that visual. There we go. The conjunction is happening on June 30th at around 10 degrees of Cancer, and then the morning maximum elongation is happening July 22nd at around 11 degrees of Cancer. So we have literally 3 events above, below, above. They're all related. They are all corresponding in that they happen in the same degrees. Very different visually. Evening sky, high and bright, invisible, and then morning sky, high and bright. But they're all corresponding. They're in the same degrees. It's absolutely, and it happens this way every single time. It's amazing. And you'll notice here that we have 6 in a row that happen in water signs. And then next year, remember the order is sun, moon, air, earth. So fire, water, air, earth. So next year, these alignments will move into the air signs. But for now, they're happening in water. And let's just do some really basic thinking about water. What is remarkable about water? Well, it's wet, it's moist, right? And moistness as a quality is about bringing things together, right? If you have a bunch of dry cake mix, you have like flour and like, what do you call it, the baking powder or whatever, and it's all dry. And if you threw it up in the air, it would just blow away, into a cloud of, but when you add water in there, you get it all gloms together into one thing, right? So the moistness is a quality of water. Well, isn't it interesting that before Mercury went into Cancer for this extended stay, we had all been like separated and keeping our distance from one another and yada yada. And then all of a sudden Mercury goes into Cancer, and oh, everybody's coming together for these protests and stuff, you know. And that, well, first of all, you know, things were starting to open back up here in North Carolina anyway. I can't speak to everywhere. You know, you had like restaurants were opening, but they were, you know, at half capacity, but still people were coming back together, you know. And then we have this huge thing going on with the protests for Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all the other people that have been killed by the police this year. And this is very interesting to me because the star that we find in these degrees of around 10 degrees of Cancer, tropical, is the constellation of Gemini, and particularly the star Alhena, which is in the heel of the dark twin, Pollux, right? So let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we have Castor and Pollux, right? And you'll notice that this pink line is the ecliptic, right? And you'll notice how the constellation of Gemini is sort of on its side, so that as it sets, the Pollux side of the twins is the one that touches the Earth. It's the one that touches the ecliptic plane. That's the Earth plane. Whereas Castor, the Castor twin is more above. It's more ethereal. So you have this myth about this sort of immortal. There's one immortal twin and there's one mortal. There's one light and one dark twin. And you'll notice that the star Alhena is down here on the side of Pollux, the dark twin. And Alhena is literally where the heel of the twin touches the Earth. And so there's this wounding that happens from being subjected to mortality. And there's a whole myth around that. What's really interesting also is that Bernadette Brady, whose program I'm using here, Starlight, she calls this star the proudly marching one, right? It's the heel. It's like, so it's about marching. And isn't it interesting with Mercury making 3 alignments with Alhena, this proudly marching one, and all of a sudden there's protests like all over the country. I mean, that to me is just amazing. And I think it proves that this technique works, that these elongations are something to pay attention to, and that all the work I did in codifying them and putting them into an ephemeris was worthwhile. Because otherwise, we wouldn't know about this. If we weren't paying attention to maximum elongations, like Mercury would just kind of go by Alhena and nobody even noticed. But the fact that it's making 3 alignments with Alhena is well worth paying attention to, and it is a striking correspondence between the above and the below. You see? And isn't it interesting that we have, you know, this dark twin and this light twin, right? Because, you know, truth be told, these protests are about way more than the fact, as if that wasn't enough, that Black people are getting killed by the cops left and right. Some of them because they didn't even do anything except be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But we have this dark twin and this light twin and this you know, omnipresent and grossly obvious presence of institutionalized racism that has been embedded in the history of this country from the beginning, and in fact before the beginning. Because if you look at the so-called Enlightenment philosophers, you can see the seeds of it going way back even before the formation of this country. And in fact, the first slaves arrived on the continent long before the country itself was formed. So this idea of the dark twin and the light twin, I think, is very interesting in that regard. Not interesting as in positively interesting, but kind of disturbingly interesting, because we have enshrined in our founding documents, you know, the institution of slavery. And even after we managed to abolish that practice, you know, we still have unbelievably different outcomes for Black people than white people. You know, and that's just a fact, and it's so obvious. There's so many. I posted a bunch of links to go with this post on my Facebook yesterday about everything from the fact that you're way more likely to, if you have diabetes, you're way more likely to get, you know, one of your limbs amputated if you're a Black person because of the way that healthcare is delivered. For instance, everything from that to, you know, income and wealth inequality is much more grossly between whites and Blacks, and you know, the prison industrial complex is basically modeled around a slave, you know, mentality where the master gets to, you know, just be inhumane towards their property, and that's the way that we treat our you know, prisoners who are vastly people of color, right? So it's very interesting that this twins, that Mercury is spending a lot of time in the constellation of the twins, and in particular this proudly marching one. I think it speaks volumes to what's going on. So what about for those people who, for whatever reason, can't afford to be out there marching in the streets? You know, somebody might say, well, Gary, you know, that's great, and I support that. I support people's right to protest, and I support, you know, having reforms around these areas. Excuse me. But, you know, I've got a new baby in my house. I can't afford to get arrested. Who's going to take care of my children, you know, if I get hurt, etc., right? What is this? How does this have anything to do with my life? Well, the other thing that came out of this codifying of the Mercury retrograde, recodifying, reframing of the Mercury retrograde, if you have this above, below, and above, it sort of breaks it into three parts, right? And the three is a very hermetic number, right? In Hermeticism, we have three being the salt, the body of something, the sulfur, the fiery driving force, the soul of that thing, and the spirit, the consciousness of that thing. So we have three in that way. And we also have three in terms of a process of transformation, which is a kind of initiation process, a purification process. And you'll notice in this table I have up here separation, nigredo, initiation, albedo, return, rubedo. So these first words, separation, initiation, return, these are from Joseph Campbell's monomyth of the heroine's journey, right? Separation, hero goes out from the normal world, out into the special world. Initiation, they receive this, they go through this trial, and they find a special boon, a special treasure or elixir, then they return, they bring that back to their village. The Negredo, Albedo, Rubedo, we talked about that before with Venus. There's a blackening, right? Things fall away, like in the autumn, you know, when the leaves fall from the trees, right? It's time to separate from normal. It's time for something to become black and um, to putrefy, because it's outlived its usefulness. And really, oftentimes, it's simply about recognizing and allowing that which is ready to be transformed to do that, to, you know, instead of like just trying to like pretend it's not there or shove it out of awareness, just to say, oh wow, you know, this part of my life is in need of transformation, and I'm going to welcome that, and I'm going to allow that. I'm going to make space for that to happen, instead of saying, no, 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 I got to keep going. You know, I got to keep going every day the same, normal, normal, normal. I'm not going to allow any space for that, right? Oftentimes it's really just about allowing it, then trying to make it happen. And then somewhere in that process of letting go, because we've let something go, there's space, and you know, nature abhors a vacuum, and in that space that we've created through letting something go, the light shines in, the albedo comes in, there's a new energy that is able to enter into the system, and there's a glimpse of the future, essentially. And then this stirs things and gets things moving, and then as we go into the final stage of the rubido, that's about taking this vision of the future, this conscious idea of the future, and making it real. This is about the reddening, the making real through blood, sweat, and tears, and embodiment of the future, right? Morning star future. So this is a process that we can use, similar to what we talked about, the alchemical journey of Venus, from greatest brightness through conjunction to greatest brightness. With Mercury, it's greatest elongation, conjunction, greatest elongation. Same idea. We can use this process to understand a universal process of change, and that if we allow the different phases to happen, then we can be in accord with that thing, and we don't have to like just try to keep normal, normal, normal until something just completely breaks, and we're forced to like, okay, thanks a lot, Mercury retrograde, you know, you broke my whatever. And it's like, well, if you had been paying attention and allowed that energy someplace to be, maybe it wouldn't have had to just all of a sudden, you know, come in like that, you see? So in my book, I dedicate one chapter, one section each to each of these. This chapter, chapter 4, the alchemy of transformation. I dedicate three different sections to this Negredo, Albedo, Ribedo, you know, to these different stages, so that you can read through different ideas about how that looks and how that feels. And then at the end of each of these stages, I have some exercises. So one of the ideas for the Negredo, which is where we find ourselves now, is what the Native Americans call the potlatch, or the giveaway ceremony. And this is very interesting, because this giveaway, this freely, you know, releasing, letting go of something, right? That's what we were talking about, is the nature of the Negredo is to take something that is past its prime and remove it from service, right? So this giveaway is kind of like a natural way of achieving that same end, right? And so, and it's not about necessarily simply throwing out the trash, although, you know, it's amazing how much stuff we accumulate in a capitalist culture, right? And just getting rid of the crap 3 times a year is a great, you know, not to mention the south node eclipses, which, you know, that's a great first step. But it's not simply about that. It's also about giving away um, our time, giving away, there might be um, some tithing that you want to do. Tithing is about giving back to your community, um, giving away in terms of like um, letting go of something that you've been holding on to too closely and just giving it to God and saying, I've been trying to make this happen. I've been trying to control it and it's not working out. So like, it's yours, God. I let go. I surrender, right? Serenity prayer, you know, um, controlling what you can control and letting go and giving to God that which you can't. That's another part of it. Another exercise that I talk about here is fasting. And fasting need not be, denying yourself food. Although, if it's done correctly and if you're healthy enough to do that, that can certainly be something that's a good practice. But you could fast from a lot of different things. You can fast from, there are days where I'm like, I'm just not going to bother with email today. I'm not going to bother with Facebook today. I'm not going to bother with, whatever. I'm going to have, I'm going to fast from that thing for a day or two or three or, however long it feels appropriate. So fasting from things that are bad for you, whether that be physical things or spiritual things, so forth, like purging the willpower, reclaiming your willpower to say, nope, I'm not going to do that thing. I'm going to have the strength to say no, you see. And then purging the Mercury is a really interesting process. We can, it takes a lot of psychic energy to, in Jungian psychology, they talk about the persona, which is that part of ourselves that we show to the world as this, this is me, this is my curriculum vitae, this is who I am, and this is all the good stuff about me. And then we kind of like the stuff that we're not so proud of, we kind of hide back here. Yeah, don't worry about that stuff. It takes a lot of energy to keep that stuff hidden. And that's why, like for Christians, for Catholics, the confessional, right? Unburdening yourself, confessing your sins, it's extremely powerful because it relieves you of that psychic pressure of having to be, oh man, I've got this thing that I'm not that I'm not proud of, but I got to keep it in. I don't want anybody to know. And so journaling is another way that people do that. Obviously therapy and stuff like that. There's a lot of different ways that talking to a friend, just being vulnerable, you hear about that. Unburdening, your worries and concerns and stuff. All of that falls under the umbrella of the Negretto. And if we're able to do very much of that at all, as I said, it frees up space so that when the conjunction comes around, there's room for new energy to enter. You see, because if we're full and we're carrying around dead weight that's taking up space and there's no room for anything, and new energy tries to come into the system, it's going to come in and it's going to knock something out of the way, right? It might knock something you actually wanted out of the way instead of the stuff that well, you know what, I didn't really need that. Why couldn't you knock that out of the way? Well, you didn't put that in the pile to be knocked out of the way, bucko. I had to knock something. You see what I'm saying? So it's about being more intentional and about allowing room for new energy to come in so that the albedo, and you can direct the albedo as well in terms of you can use that time around the conjunction. I think I said it was it's around June 30th. the day before, day of, and day after in particular. You can use the time of the albedo as that for prayer, for seeding. I started this podcast on the day of a retrograde. Mercury was retrograde when I started this podcast. People say, well, don't start anything when Mercury's retrograde. Well, I started this podcast during a Mercury retrograde way back in 2008 on the day of a inferior conjunction with Mercury. And I did that intentionally. Because people say, well, don't start anything under Mercury retrograde. You'll just have to do it over again. Well, isn't that the point with podcasting? Number one. Number two, I believe because Mercury is the closest to Earth, right? Mercury is penetrating the Sun-Earth enclave. Mercury is in there, closest to us. That's a great time for that albedo, for that light of something new to plant seeds. So I did that intentionally, and so far so good. Here we are 12 years later, and I'm still going, and like a full Jupiter cycle. So I think that you can be directive in terms of the albedo. You can go looking for a specific thing, but you can also just open yourself and be, hey, I've created some room in the system. What you got for me? God, goddess, about, whatever you call the higher power. What is it that you see me in need of, and be receptive to that, right? And then later, whatever shape, and then watch for that new energy to come in, right? And welcome it, and and then later, as I said, in July, it'll be around July 22nd, day before, day of, and day after in particular, when we enter the rubedo, where really it'll be when Mercury, enters the morning sky. So I don't know, a week or so after right about the time that Mercury stations direct. It's time to start the rubedo. So okay, I have this new energy now. I have to nurture that energy. I have to go out and water that plant every day, and I have to make sure that it's getting plenty of sunshine and there's no weeds choking it out. And I got to do the all the stuff to make that energy real in the world. You see. And I just think this is such a better way than, saying, oh, Mercury's going retrograde, run and hide, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. Because, when you just say don't all the time and you resist, I think you get more of that, not less of that, whatever you're resisting. Whereas if you say do, if you promote things that are things that you want to do and things that you're looking for, I think it's just a healthier way to have an outlet for managing, these periods. We know they come around 3 times a year, and so why not have a something that's a little more productive, something that's a little more healthy, something that's a little more spiritual, a way of managing that. So that's pretty much why I wrote this book. It's Hermetica Triptycha, Mercury Elemental Year. It's from Rubedo Press. You can find it there on Rubedo Press website. It's on Amazon too if you shop there. And yeah, hopefully y'all have enjoyed this. If you're out there marching, be careful, be safe. It seems like right now they're responding to a police problem with more police. So I don't know how that's going to work out. But remaining hopeful that, there's been a loud enough outcry this time around that they realize they have to do something about making this prison industrial complex a little more humane and a lot less racist, hopefully. And so we can keep on praying for that and being supportive of that. And, maybe that'll be, when the rubedo comes around, maybe the the blackening, the negretto in this stage is saying, hey, no more of that crap. That's what needs to go, right? And then maybe, around the albedo, we can find some, make some headway in that process, and the libido will be about actual substantive changes happening on the ground. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And hopefully also you can find the same process working in your life. All right, so that's it for this time. If you want to find out more about me, of course, I'm on dreamastrologer.com. There's a few different ways you can subscribe and become a member and get my monthly magical reports. I'm going to be working on, let's see, what have I got on the, I'm going to be working on some, I'll show you. I'm going to be working on Mercury is going to be, when Mercury goes into the second decan of Cancer, the second 10 degrees, that's a decan that Mercury rules. Mercury will be in its own bounds also. And the image associated with that is the Three of Cups. So I've got these Three of Cups tarot cards printed on birchwood, engraved on birchwood. And then on the back we have the symbol for Mercury in Cancer. And this is the fixed star Sirius, where Mercury is going to be stationed in conjunct Sirius. So I'm going to be infusing these with a tincture that's mugwort and juniper, that's to bring in the energy of the star Sirius. And as Mercury rises in its own decan, I'm going to be consecrating these. And I'm making about 22 of them, and I'm going to offer them to my members first. So if you want to be part of that program, you can find it on the special offers page. There's a few different ways to sign up. Also, be sure to sign up for my newsletter. I have those come out about 3 or 4 times a year. And remember to subscribe to the podcast, and also on the YouTube, because we got a lot more coming. I've got several more. I'm going to be talking about the eclipses later this month. We're going to talk about Mars in the last decan of Pisces, which Mars rules. So there's some magical opportunities there. Let's see, what else have we got on the docket? We're going to talk about Mercury's retrograde loop also, the particular loop shape that Mercury makes. So stay tuned. We've got a lot more goodies coming for you this month. Until next time, bright blessings of Mercury at maximum elongation, evening star. Bye for now, y'all.